Let's start.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural session of the Reliance Foundation Youth Sports Athletics Development Webinar Series 2021. Thank you for attending this webinar today. We are all very excited to have you here with us today at this one-of-its-kind educational webinar series brought to you by Reliance Foundation Youth Sports. RFYS aims to enable the ecosystem of sport through improvement in infrastructure, skill development of PE teachers, digital empowerment, and by creating sporting heroes. Reliance Foundation Youth Sports is a countrywide multi-sport platform for schools and colleges. The platform was established to encourage a sporting culture in schools and colleges to enable India's next champions. The development series will present 12 webinars covering all aspects of athlete development, such as coaching, strength and conditioning, sports injury prevention and management, sports psychology, and nutrition. Regular participants of this series will be awarded a certificate. From them, a few lucky ones will also be extended an invitation to attend our advanced webinar series, which is coming up shortly. Today's topic, how to structure a training session, is being presented by renowned coach James Hillier. He is a head coach at the Reliance Foundation Odisha HPC Training Center in Bhubaneswar, who previously, as British athletics high performance coach for sprints and hurdles, coached multiple Olympic, World Championships, Commonwealth Games, and European Championship medalists. If you have any questions during the presentations, you may please type it in the question and answer box, and they will be responded to at the end of the session. Now I hand over to Coach James Hillier.
Thank you very much, Ajit, for the kind words there. Welcome everybody to the topic today, which is how to structure a training session. Thank you so much for logging in. I know a huge number of you are giving up your time here to listen to what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to focus today on working predominantly with 12 to 16-year-old athletes. I'll try to talk nice and slowly so you can all understand me. And I'm going to take you through the process and the thoughts behind how you structure a training session for athletics, specifically 12 to 16-year-old athlete. So it's important when you're setting up a training session to think about the people you're designing the session for. And it's very interesting to understand what are the motivations for young people to do athletics. Predominantly, it's for fun, enjoyment. Maybe it's because of parents or teachers that are pushing their kids into sport or athletics. Sometimes it's about learning new skills. So people wanting to learn new skills or mastering old skills. Perhaps their friends or peers are also doing athletics and they want to come along too. Success possibly has something to do with it as well. So a lot of young athletes or athletes that got into sport when they're young, they did it because they were good at it. Perhaps they did well in school competition or something like that. Perhaps gaining recognition, and it perhaps even convenient as well. So perhaps there's a good coach or a good athletics facility near to where the athlete lives. Appropriate level coaching and appropriate level competitions have also been shown to be really, really important factors towards why young people do athletics. We must also look at why young people drop out of athletics. The unfortunate side effect of athletics and actually sport in general is many, many, many young people drop out of sport far too young and actually don't go on to do sport into their high teens or into their 20s and 30s. A lot of this can be attributed to boredom, perhaps some lack of success, maybe some unwanted pressure from parents, coaches, perhaps a loss of interest in athletics, perhaps the friendship group that they had in athletics leaving or going to do something else, perhaps a lack of facilities or a lack of good, appropriate level coaching, maybe a lack of competitions also, and of course, if somebody's good at athletics, invariably they tend to be good at other sports also. So perhaps many good athletes have been lost to other sports. So now let's look at the sort of things that make an effective training session. So first and foremost, when we're working with young athletes, the training session should be fun and fulfilling. It should be progressive. So athletes should start off with something that they can do, and then we want to try and challenge them to make it a little bit harder, a little bit more progressive, a little bit more advanced as they go on. We want to focus on improvements. A lot of young people, particularly in this day and age with the pressures of social media and how you look, people tend to focus too much on other people and how they are perceived. So we want to focus on the individual, and the best competitor an athlete can have is themselves. So we want the athlete to focus on improvement rather than absolute numbers. So don't worry when you're working with a young athlete if they're ranked very, very low in your state or in the country. Just focus on getting them better, because you never know what will happen in the future in the long term. An effective training session should be engaging. So the young athletes you're working with should feel engaged by you as the coach or the physical education teacher, and engaged by the content that you are delivering. And also make it rewarding. So reward achievement, reward good process, good performances based on the talent level of the athletes that you have. Now, when we're setting up a training program, we must also consider the overarching philosophy that is the long-term athlete development model. Many of you will have come across this model before. Generally accepted that there's 7 stages to this model. These stages identified right from birth right through to adulthood. And a training session should be structured based on the principles that have been set out in a long-term athlete development model. I'm just going to quickly run through the development model. Just for some of you, this might be reinforcement. For some of you, this might be something that's new. So the first stage of the long-term athlete development model is the active child stage. So 0 to 6 years, where we want to promote multiple daily physical activity sessions, encourage a lot of discovery and exploration. And with young kids, we want to start them rolling, turning, and perhaps even walking, running, jumping and throwing as they get a little bit older. Second stage is the have fun stage. This is about promoting moving and general physical activity as being a fun thing. We want to generally develop the athletes, and we want to encourage cognitive learning. We want to use games to teach basic elements of athletics. As we go to the third stage, which is the learning to train stage. Because at this point, we want to start developing general sports skills. It's widely accepted that at these ages, we should be teaching having a multi-sport approach to the development of our athletes. We don't want to pigeonhole them in one sport at this age. We want to introduce basic warm-ups. We want to introduce flexibility and coordination training. And at this stage, we want to actually bring potentially good kids, athletes into sport. So it's a talent identification stage. But at this stage, this is where most people start to do athletics, for example. Fourth stage is the training to train stage. This is now the stage where we start to develop specific skills for all sports. And athletics is really the foundation of most physical sports. 3 caveats to athletics: running, jumping, and throwing. We want to now introduce body weight training and maybe some light weight training. And this is where we look at our general talent selection stage. So talent selection now is where we've got athletes that are already involved in athletics. Now we will start to push them towards an event group, maybe sprints, maybe jumps, maybe throws, maybe endurance. The fifth stage is the training to compete stage. So now we want to teach the athletes how to compete. So we want to build the specific qualities required for competitions. And we want to start to specialize the athlete in their event and their event groups. The sixth stage is the high performance stage. So now we want to really maximize every last bit of talent that the athlete has. We want to perform in the key competitions, maybe national championships, or if they're good enough, maybe international championships. And we want to really extract all of the potential out of that athlete. The final stage is the fit for life stage. So the idea of this long-term athlete development plan is, having been active for so many years, that you continue to be active and healthy throughout the whole of your adult life. Now, let's look at some of the key considerations for writing a training program. So we must consider the age, the level, the availability, and the number of athletes that we have in our training groups. So if we have 30 athletes aged 13 and 14, our training session will look significantly different if we have 4 athletes aged 18. So we must look at and consider the age and the number, availability, and the level of the athletes that we have. We must also think, what are the athletes training for? Are they training for a local competition? Are they training just to get fit? Are they training specifically for a high-level competition, such as a state championships or even a national championships? What facilities and equipment do we have? That is always a consideration. I know some of you have very challenging situations with facilities and equipment, so you have to be creative. You have to find solutions to the challenges that you have. And training should be done by doing. When a child learns how to walk, we don't tell the child how to walk. They learn how to walk by doing, by failing, relearning, failing again, and relearning until they get it right. And training, the training session, is an opportunity for people to learn. It's often been said, as a coach, the less we teach, the more the athlete learns. So always try and get the athletes to experience by doing. We mustn't be too autocratic with our explanations for training. We must also consider how we're going to progress the units of work that we are doing. So we want to train the athlete to succeed. So if the athlete is a beginner, let's give them some very basic skills, very basic training units that they will achieve. They will feel fulfilled. And then once they can do that, then we can make those tasks more complex. We also want to quantify our training. So we must have some form of testing or competitions, so we know that our training is effective and we can validate and reflect and improve our training processes. And we want to focus on improvement of the individual rather than comparing results with others. We talked a little bit about that earlier. So now let's talk about the training session as a whole. So there's 3 main components to a training session: the warm-up, the main bulk of the session, where you get the majority of your work done, and the cool down. And a really nice acronym that we can use when we talk about the warm-up is RAMP. So R stands for raising the core temperature. A stands for activation of the key joints. M stands for mobilization of key muscle groups. And P stands for potentiation, basically priming the muscles for the main training session. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about these areas of the warm-up later on. And I'm going to show some practical examples and some videos that you can see exactly the sort of sessions, the sort of work that you can do. And a warm-up in effect, is training in disguise. So it's not just getting warm to be able to train properly. It's about introducing elements of training into the warm-up that is going to make the athlete better. So it's training in disguise rather than just a warm-up. Now, when we talk about the main session itself, we want to look at rehearsing the key movements required for our training session. So if we are doing a sprint session, for example, we would want to rehearse some of the key movements and skills that we want to use in our main session. We always want to put the most intense training at the start of the session, or close to the start of the session, obviously once they are warmed up, because intense training must be done when the athlete is fresh. Now that also goes for technical training. If you're trying to teach the athlete new technical skills, then that should be done towards the start of the training session. Now, if an athlete's already learned good technical skills and you now want to reinforce those skills, then perhaps you can shift that component of work to the end of the training session when they're a little bit more fatigued. Because when an athlete is tired and fatigued, the intensity will drop and quite often the technique will deteriorate. So it's important that if you want to reinforce good technique, you do that when it's tired. So think about the structure of the session and where you're going to put the key elements and the key components of work. Now, one question we must always ask ourselves is quality versus quantity. We must decide whether the training session is going to be a quality, high-intensity session, or whether it's going to be more of a quantity, volume-based session. And then we would structure the training accordingly. With young athletes, maybe you'll only see them 2 or 3 times per week. Therefore, it's a good idea to combine multiple units of work into each training session for the young athlete. And I'll show you some examples of that later on in the presentation. When it comes to a cool down, there's certain things that we can do to just help us recover from the training so that we are able to train the next day, or get ready for training in the next training session, if you like. Jogging is a good way of recovering, and general aerobic work is a good way of speeding up the recovery process. However, if we're working with sprinters, we don't want to do too much jogging. So we might want to do some jogging or skipping, or maybe some easy strides, something like that. So just think about the athletes that we've got and relate that to the specific cool down that you're going to devise. Stretching is a really good way to aid recovery, and things like ice baths and using frozen peas. Bags of frozen peas are excellent to stick on sore muscles and stuff because they mold around the muscles. And we should also encourage our athletes to start reflecting and reviewing their training. So whilst they're doing their stretching, or they're sitting in an ice bath, or doing some reflection, they should start to write a training diary. And a training diary has been shown to be one of the most effective things that an elite athlete has in his or her armory. So we want to encourage good reflection and a training diary from an early age. So let's break the warm-up down a little bit more and go into some more detail and look at some examples of the sort of things that we can do. So R stands for raising the core temperature. So we might want to start the warm-up in a tracksuit or running tights. Now, we all live in a hot country, so this might not be appropriate, but in winter, the north of India gets pretty cold. So you guys living up in the north, you might want to start your athletes warming up in a tracksuit during the winter months. We can perhaps jog or skip 2 laps. If you have endurance athletes, maybe you jog a little bit further. If you have sprint athletes or sprint hurdlers, you maybe jog, skip, stride, 2 laps. You can do some easy strides, as we just discussed. You can do some comfort stretching. So when the athletes meet up, they can just do a little bit of comfort stretching for 5 or 10 minutes. They can have a catch up with each other. So then when the main session starts, they're focused on training. And foam rolling is a good thing to be doing before the training session. So foam rolling is very good for fascial release. Fascia is a thin film that lies above the muscles. And when fascia gets tight, it generally causes tightness around the whole body. And foam rolling is something that's better to do before the session, not afterwards. A stands for activation. So we want to do some key activation around the joints. So we can look at hip activation, leg activation, some dynamic leg activation, core activation, and then we can work the shoulders as well. Then we want to do some mobilization. So mobilization is more about muscles. So now we start to mobilize the muscles. And generally, we want our warm-ups to be dynamic in nature. So we don't want to do a huge amount of static stretching before the session. Our longer static stretching would tend to take place after the session. So we want to do some hip, back, mainly, but also just some general mobilization, just so the body's moving well and you're nice and free. The athletes are nice and free when they start their main session. And then we want to do some potentiation or priming of the muscles. So now we want to start to really prepare for the main session. So for example, you could do some stiffness jumps to work on good ankle strength and good foot strength. You could do some fast strides. You could do some cone runs, and I'll show you a video, an example of some cone runs very shortly. You could do some acceleration runs, maybe even some block starts. It's entirely up to you, but it's all about now getting the body ready for the main activity that you're going to do. This is an example here of some cone runs. So basically, the athlete has set the cones up at 6 foot lengths apart. So each cone is 6 of the athlete's foot lengths apart. And this is a really good exercise for teaching the athlete to run over something. Now, when we're sprinting, we want to basically pull the heel into the backside, and we want to then step down from above. Okay, so we want to pull the heel up into the backside, and we want to step down from above. And this is an excellent drill or excellent exercise that puts the athlete in a position to run with good technique. So this is an excellent exercise. If any of you work with sprinters, this is a really good exercise to work on. Now, if you have younger athletes or inexperienced athletes, you might want to start with the cones 5 foot lengths apart. And as they get a little bit stronger and faster, you can move maybe to 5.5 foot lengths or even out to 6. The athlete in this clip is an experienced athlete, and therefore he's working at 6 steps. And in fact, now he's 6.5 sometimes if he's in really good shape. Now let's look at the main session. So, an example of a main session. So, in this example, we're going to take a young hurdler, and we're going to go right through the warm-up, the activation, the mobilization, the potentiation, examples of the main session. I'll show you some little videos and clips and stuff, so you've got a good idea of the sort of things that you can do in a training session. So let's just quickly talk through everything, and then we can watch some videos so you've got some live examples of exactly what exercises you can do with your athletes. So the athlete turns up. We're going to do 2 laps of jogging and skipping just to raise the body temperature. Then we're going to do some activation work. So we're going to start with the hips, then we're going to start with the legs, then we're going to do some dynamic leg movements, Then we're going to work the shoulders and the core muscles. So let's have a look now at some examples here of activation exercises. So I think you can see there from the exercises that they were dynamic in nature. There wasn't any static stretching or anything like that in there. It was very, very dynamic in nature. So lots of full body movement. So even though the crab walks, the cariokas were focusing on the hip, there was other stuff being worked as well. The legs, the dynamic legs, the shoulders, the core, there's lots of good movement going on. So I now want to talk through the mobilization. So we've got, we're going to follow the process of hip, then the back, and then just some general hurdle mobility exercises, hurdle walkovers. You can see here how she's moving the legs quite dynamically as she's doing these hamstring curls. So now we're bringing some lateral movement in, some crossovers. And some standing hip circles now. We're bringing a circular motion into these exercises. So now we're working on the back specifically, but this is a hurdle specific back exercise. It requires a little bit of coordination and practice. And this is another hurdle leg exchange exercise. So notice how dynamic it is, that we're not holding the stretch for very long at all. This is a really nice back exercise called scorpions. Again, notice we're not holding the exercise for very long. So it's a very dynamic exercise. So now we're going to do some hurdle walkover exercises. Now, hurdle walkovers are great for all athletes. You don't need to be a hurdler. These aren't hurdle exercises. These are mobility exercises. fantastic for the hips, really good for the lower back. And all athletes should be doing hurdle mobility work, in my opinion. This is a nice exercise because it's teaching the athlete rhythm as well. So rhythm is a really important part to athletics. So we're getting some mobility work, also some rhythm as well, which is really important. And then finally, we're looking at some potentiation exercises. So like I said, I talked at the start about having different units of work in the same training session. And the benefits of that are that if you don't see an athlete too much in a week, maybe 3 times a week, that you can work on lots of different elements and different skills. So an example of this training session, we're just going to put some very light movement and teaching skills of weightlifting and some running coordination drills before we start the real main bulk of the session. So just have a look at some of these exercises. This is an overhead squat. It's a fantastic exercise. And with young athletes, you can start with just a light bar or maybe a broom handle or a stick or something, a hockey stick or anything like that. This is a hang clean. And again, with younger athletes, you just want to teach the movement. The weight isn't important. And this is a hang snatch. So now we're putting the bar over the head. And again, with younger athletes, the movement is the most important thing. Now let's look at some running and coordination drills. So these are stiffness jumps. So the idea here is the athlete will land 2-footed and try not to bend the legs. Keep the legs nice and stiff. This is an exercise to start teaching the running cycle. Now we're doing whip through. So we're trying to race the legs here. So the leg that starts up, you're trying to race that down and then race the other leg up and see which one wins. And then this is a double knee whip through. This is quite a complicated, complex drill. So you would only do that exercise with athletes that have mastered the other exercises. Now let's look at the example of the main session. So remember, we have a young under 16 female hurdler. So we've now done our warm-up exercises. We've done our potentiation work. Now we start the main session. So, for example, we can do some acceleration work. Now, we might want to do it on the flat because probably our athlete will do hurdles and flat running. So they can do some acceleration runs from different starting positions. So maybe you could do a falling start. This is where the athlete stands with their feet together, arms by their side, and they will simply fall forward. And once they can't fall any further, they will then accelerate out. They could then do a 3-point start, which is where they have 3 points of contact on the track. Front foot, the back foot, and one hand on the track. That would be known as a 3-point start. And then a 4-point start would be the traditional start we do from blocks, where we have 4 contacts with the ground: the front foot, the back foot, and the 2 hands. When we come to hurdling, we can do some 5-stride hurdle work. So we can put the hurdles on the marks, and we can just, rather than doing a 3-stride rhythm that the athletes would try and do in a race, we do 5 strides, which means that they run slower and they can basically concentrate on individual elements of technique. So they just run over the hurdles with a 5-stride rhythm rather than a 3-stride rhythm. Then we can do starts over 2, 3 hurdles. And then they can perhaps do some 3-stride runs over 3 to 6 hurdles with adjusted spacings. So what I mean by adjusted spacings is work with the athlete you've got. The goal with hurdling is to develop a fast 3-stride rhythm. If your athlete is unable to get a fast 3-stride rhythm in between the hurdles at the event they compete at, then we must bring the hurdles in closer. So the distance between the hurdles is less. that will make the fast 3-stride rhythm easier for the athletes to achieve. An example would be an under 20 female hurdler doing the 100-meter hurdles. The distance between the hurdles is 8.5 meters. Now, if the girl that's doing this has to really stretch long to make 3 strides, then we can bring the hurdles in, maybe to 8 meters. We bring them in by what we would say 50 centimeters or roughly 2 foot lengths. Now the hurdles will be 8 meters apart, and the athlete would easily be able to do a 3-stride rhythm. Once they get better, faster, stronger, and more confident, then we can put the hurdles back out to 8.5 meters, and they can run over the normal event distance. So now let's have a look at the athlete doing a start over 3 hurdles. Once we've done some hurdling, then we're just going to finish off with some speed endurance. So speed endurance would tend to come after the speed work, or in this case, our specific hurdle work. Speed endurance should be short runs of no more than 120 meters, and the recovery should be short between the reps, and it should be quite long between the sets. So in our example here, we're going to get our athletes to do 2 sets of 3 times 60-meter runs with just 1 minute between the 60 meters and then 6 to 8 minutes between the sets. Once we've done that, then we want to do some power development at the end of the session. So we're going to do some standing long jumps, some bow jumps, block start jumps, which I'll show you on a video in a minute. Well, let's have a look now at our athlete doing some jumps at the end of the session. So this is power development at the end of the session. So this is a standing long jump. So she would start and land on 2 feet, bow jump with arms behind the back, and a block start jump, which is basically in a block start position, you just jump into the sand. Our second example is under 16 sprinter male. So let's now look at some examples of our under 16 male athletes. So we want to follow exactly the same format of ramp warm-up. So we want to raise the body temperature. We want to activate the joints. We want to mobilize the muscles, and then we want to potentiate or prime the muscles for the main session. So we're going to do 2 laps, the jog and a skip. Then we're going to do some activation work, again, following exactly the same pattern that we did before. But now we've got some slightly different exercises. So the first exercise is a single leg forward bow. So we're just arms out to the side, and you're just rocking forward and keeping the leg straight. Sometimes this is known as an arabesque as well. It's a really good exercise for the hamstrings. And now we're just going to do some work on the hip with some what we call some fire hydrant exercises. So you can see how he's mobilizing the hip. He's adding some rotation and extension of the leg, which will help warm up the hip joint and all the muscles and stuff around the hip joint. Now he's coming the other way, so he's gone back. Now he's coming forward. And now he's going across the body. So we're actually now working in different planes of movement. So we're not just going backwards and forwards like we do when we run. In our warm-up exercises, we're going side to side, back to forward, twisting, turning. So we're adding lots of different movements into the exercises. Now he's doing what's called a donkey kick at the end there. That's another good exercise for the hips as well. So now we're going into a lunge circuit. So this is the leg exercises now. So he's as you notice, he's going on different positions here. So he's going backwards, out to the side, out to the side, and then the front. So you can actually look at it like a face of a clock. You know, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and you can use those references with the athletes. So you can say, I want you to lunge 2 o'clock, and they will go at 2 o'clock, or lunge at 6 o'clock, which would be behind them. This is a dynamic leg exercise, single leg hop drives, or hop jumps. And now we've got lunge switches, really good exercise to get the legs really primed for exercise. Onto the shoulders, so crossover diagonal. So again, we're adding a different plane of movement in here. And now we're just doing some wall angels. So an athlete is using the wall as a guide so they don't lose their posture. And they're trying to reach as high as they can to get really good extension of the arms around the shoulders. And now we've got some core exercises. So this is an Alekna exercise. So alternate arm, alternate leg. You want to extend the leg, extend the arm, and you want to keep the leg from touching the ground. Now this is a plank exercise, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but we're going to push slightly forward and back. So we're going to just roll over the elbows and over the ankles, forwards and backwards. So it's a plank with a little bit of complex in there. Again, if you've got less experienced athletes, maybe you'll just do a plank without any movement. But once they can do the plank, then you might want to add some little bit of complex or complexity to the plank and do some movements and stuff like that. Let's look now at some mobilization exercises, again, done in a dynamic way. So these are inverted scissors. So again, movement in a different plane, lateral plane. Backwards and forwards plane now. And notice again that he's continually moving. So he's not holding any of these exercises. It's called glute switches. Glutes are the big muscles in the buttocks, and they need to be, warmed up well for sprinters. And we've got some thoracic rotation. This is for the back, namely the top of the back. And now we've got some seated thoracic rotation. So again, we're adding some rotation into these back warm-up exercises. Even though when we sprint, there's not a huge amount of rotation of the back, but we want to still warm up those exercises because it's training in disguise. Now we're doing some more hurdle drills. So even though our athlete is a sprinter, not a hurdler, they are still doing hurdle walkover exercises, because this is not exercises, as I said earlier, specific to hurdlers. This is an exercise for all athletes, and it's really good for coordination, really good for hip mobility in particular, back mobility, rhythm. And there's lots and lots of different exercises that you can do over the hurdles. We would normally use around 6 to 8 hurdles. He's putting his hands on the hurdles there, just so he really has to work on his holding his posture, and really has to work on the hip flexor muscles. So if he doesn't have the hands on the side there, he would have more room to move from side to side and less control over the movement. So he's trying to basically put the hands on the side there to keep a very nice tight posture And it makes the exercise a little bit harder, but a lot more effective. And then we look at potentiation. So we can do some vertical jumps. I don't think my video is working on that, but then we can do some vertical jumps, literally just jumping as high as you can, as high as you can. And a vertical jump is a very important exercise for sprinters. There's a strong correlation of good vertical jump and sprint performance. Now let's look at some running and coordination drills. These will be mini hurdle runs. So similar to the cone runs we saw earlier, is teaching the athlete to step over and step down. The high knee overhead runs is the same, but now with a bar over your head, you could use a broom handle again, or if you don't have a stick, you could use a towel or anything like that. The idea is you put your hands over your head to stop rotation and to also encourage good posture and the athlete being tall. Now we look at the main session for our sprinter. So again, we can do some accelerations and we can also do some hurdling, but we're going to do some 4-stride hurdling. So let's just have a look at this athlete doing a 4-stride hurdle work. And let's just look at the difference between a 4-stride and a 3-stride hurdle technique. So if you notice, with 4 strides, the athlete is leading with a different leg on each hurdle. So this athlete took the first hurdle on the right leg, second on the left, third on the right, the fourth on the left, and the fifth on the right. Now this is a nice exercise to do for non-hurdlers or 400-meter hurdlers. 400-meter hurdlers obviously need to be able to hurdle on with both legs. And sprinters, we would use this exercise not necessarily to be a better hurdler, but we want to encourage good coordination. So we're teaching them how to hurdle because it's good for their general development, general coordination. The main session would be speed. So we're going to do 2 times 70, 2 times 80, 2 times 90. And we'll have a good recovery of about 4 to 5 minutes recovery between the runs, and maybe a little bit longer between the sets. And they would be fast. So let's look at one of our athletes here now doing a 90-meter run. Now, no, I don't know if any of you noticed, but on the track, there were cones on the track. I've actually put cones at every 30-meter segment. I put a cone at 30 meters, at 60, and at 90. And my message to the athlete was to accelerate hard to 30. Then I wanted the athlete to basically hit at 30. So I wanted him to really sprint hard for 30 meters, from 30 to 60. Then when the athlete gets to 60, and there's another cone, I want him to hit again. So the idea with this 90 is not just run as fast as you can for 90, it's about running as fast as you can for 30, running even faster for the next 30, then running even faster again for the last 30. So there's a technical element component to the runs. And then at the end of the session, we did some speed endurance. So 2 sets of 2 times 120. And as I said earlier, the longest we'd ever go speed endurance would be 120 meters. Then we would finish with some medicine ball throws, which is our power development, and then some cool down exercising. So some partner assisted stretching, maybe an ice bath, or some, putting some frozen peels on some sore areas. So now let's have a look at some power development using medicine balls. That's a medicine ball overhead throw. This is a forward throw. And that's a vertical throw for height. So medicine ball work is an excellent way to develop power. And it can be done at the end of a session. Power development is good to do at the end of a session because it also starts to reset some of the muscles that have been used in training. So actually, as a byproduct of developing power at the end of a session, we have found that it also aids in the recovery of the athletes. So it's quite common that speed power athletes will finish their session, as we have done in these two examples. The female hurdler finished with some jumping into the sand, which is an explosive power exercise. And the male sprinter has finished with some medicine ball throws. I hope you found the presentation interesting. I'm sure there's lots and lots of questions that you'd love to ask. So I'm happy now to take some questions. And I think, judging by the number of questions in the chat and the Q&A, there's lots and lots of questions. So I think I'll hand back over to Ajit now, and perhaps he'll ask me some questions.
Thank you, James. There are a few questions. First question from Nutun. Should we do activation and mobilization before every session?
Yeah, you should. You definitely should, yes. Obviously, it depends on what the main session is. If the main session is a very intense session, then you would need to warm up, very well. So the activation, the mobilization work would need to be quite in-depth. If the session is maybe just an easy jog or something for an endurance athlete, then the activation and the mobilization might be very short. It might only be 5 or 10 minutes in length. And it maybe would just be some simple leg swings and a few real simple dynamic exercises before going out for a run. So yes, I would say always follow that ramp protocol for your warm-ups, but based on the session that you are doing would depend on how long and how much you would do in each of those 4 areas.
All right. Another question from Bishwaranjan Behra. If you don't have hurdles with us, do you have any alternative exercise which you can suggest instead of hurdles?
Yeah, I mean, hurdles, they don't have to be hurdles. So you can find anything. You can find, I've used buckets, plastic buckets and hockey sticks before to make hurdles. You can use bamboo canes, is something that's very good, because if you hit them, they come off. They fly off, and they're very light, so they don't hurt or anything. So I think you've just got to be creative. I appreciate a lot of you won't have hurdles, so if you can build your own, be creative. That's really the best way to do it. If you don't have anything like that at all, you can do some stuff with your partners. So you can get the partner to lie on the floor, and you can walk over your partners, or get the partners to hunt in a ball, and you can walk over your partners, which is quite good fun for younger athletes. Maybe 9 to 12-year-old athletes. You can do partner-assisted work, which is quite good fun. Yeah. So I think you've just got to be creative. I appreciate a lot of you don't have great facilities and limited equipment, but you just got to be creative and find solutions as best you can.
All right. Yeah. And there's a general question from your first slide. That is, it's a very interesting question. How to focus on success, not on failure when you plan a session?
Yeah, good. Glad someone picked up on that. So basically, what I mean by that is the athletes will always come to you with strengths and weaknesses. And invariably, most coaches look at an athlete and they say, oh, they're not very good at this. They're not very good at speed. So we're going to do loads of speed training with them. And the problem with that is that the athletes don't enjoy doing what they're not good at. So I would say with younger athletes, focus on what they're good at, so you're going to get success. Because they're good at it, they enjoy it, they'll be more engaged, they'll be more fulfilled, some of the other things that I talked about at the start there. And then you just try and gradually raise the level of their weaknesses also. But you do it in a more of a subtle way, in a more of a secondary way. So that's what I mean by that. And we want athletes to leave the training session feeling like they've achieved something, feeling like they're fulfilled because they've improved or they've got better at something. So try and set the sessions up so you're setting the sessions up so the athlete will succeed rather than will fail. So if you're in your head, you kind of know that they can run a certain time, then maybe that's the time you give them as a goal. if you don't want to give them a time they can't do, because they'll get disappointed with that. But always try and find out ways where they can succeed, they can achieve. So yeah, and focus on the strengths, but try and also manage and raise the weaknesses. That's what I meant by that. Really good question.
Yeah, focusing on positive things, reinforcing positive things. Yeah, thanks, James. Another question from Yogiraj Patil. Should we check the pulse rate of the young athletes when they start doing athletic training, especially in sprinting?
Yeah, I mean, for sprinters, it's not particularly relevant. You can do it as a sort of fun exercise, and you can sort of monitor it to monitor fitness. So, if you're consistent with it, so you test the pulse at the same time or at the same time during the session, you can see that the pulse rate is coming down as athletes are getting fitter. For endurance athletes, yes, it can be useful to check pulse rates. Because actually with endurance athletes, you might use pulse rates as a form of recovery. So rather than saying you've got 3 minutes recovery, you might say when your pulse rate drops to 130, then you will do your next run. The problem with taking pulse rates with young athletes is they can't find their pulse, and they can't count, and they lose count, and everyone gets a bit confused. So maybe if you have a large group of athletes, 30 or 40 athletes, I would say it's probably quite challenging to take pulse rates. If you have smaller groups, maybe you can do it. And a good way to do it is to maybe take a pulse for 20 seconds and then multiply that score by 3. That gives you their pulse rate for a minute. That's a good way of, rather than doing it for a whole minute. So you check the pulse for 20 seconds, then times it by 3, and that gives the athlete their pulse rate per minute.
Yeah, thank you. Another good question is like, why static stretching is not advisable as part of warm-up?
It's not so much, it's not advised. You can still do static stretching in the warm-up. It's okay to do it, but it's just been shown, science is telling us that dynamic stretching and dynamic mobility is more effective before training. Now, static stretching has a place in athletics, but it tends to be after training. So static stretching by nature is we would maybe hold the stretch for around about 30 seconds, something like that. And what we're trying to do with static stretching is we're trying to permanently increase the length of the muscle. With a dynamic warm-up, we're trying to prepare the athlete for training. And we're also trying to, as I said in one of my slides, offer training in disguise. So we're trying to get the athletes fit, and dynamic mobility and dynamic work is better to get the athletes fit. Static stretching is not really for fitness. It's purely for, improving the length of the muscles. Therefore, it's more effective to do static stretching at the end. But you can do it at the start as well if you want. I know some athletes do lots of static stretching before they train and they race. They just like it. So it's up to you how you interpret it and how much or how little of it you do before or after. But as a general rule of thumb, mainly dynamic stretching before the session and mainly static stretching afterwards.
All right. Yeah. Should we do the same type of warm-up before competition? Basically, the question is like, is there a difference between the competition warm-up and training warm-up?
Yeah, this is a great question. Yeah, I mean, there fundamentally is, absolutely. So a training warm-up is training in disguise, as I said. So you're trying to improve certain qualities of movement, as well as preparing the athletes for training. However, in a competition warm-up, you're not really interested in improvements at that stage because you have already prepared for the competition. So your sole purpose with a competition warm-up is to get the athlete ready, primed to compete, being as fresh as possible. And the key word here is fresh. With our training warm-ups, there would be some degree of fatigue from those training warm-ups because it's training in disguise. So you would then start the main session, you have a little bit of tiredness. In a competition warm-up, you do not want tiredness from the warm-up. You want to be fresh and primed, ready to perform. So there's a subtle difference between the two. So
yeah,
there might be some exercises the same. Absolutely. There might be some exercises the same, but the structure would be subtly different. Any other questions? I think we might have lost Ajit.
Yeah, no issues, James. We can probably quickly take 3 more questions before we close out the session.
Sure.
Okay, there's one quick question: how much running or fitness does a thrower needs to get into the early stage of training?
At what stage of training? Sorry.
When they are young, how much running or fitness does a thrower needs to focus upon, or should it be like more of a general training when they are young?
Yeah. So when they're young, you really want to train the key movements and coordination required for general activity. So athletics, we're very fortunate as athletics coaches because athletics, running, jumping, throwing is the foundation of most sports. So if we can get our athletes to run faster, jump higher or jump further and throw further, then invariably they will be better at other sports also. When the athletes are young, you don't know what sport they're going to end up doing. So you want to, by nature, just keep it quite general, make it fun, keep it fulfilling. Just keep trying to improve the athletes and the general qualities so that if the athletes go and do another sport, at least they go there with better coordination, better movement patterns, better motor skills, so they can, apply themselves better in other sports also. Something like football, soccer is becoming bigger and bigger here in India. Now, soccer, they run for 90 minutes. And if you don't move well, then the last 20, 30 minutes of that game, you're going to be really fatigued and you're going to lose impact. You might need to be substituted. So if you can run well and move well, not only are you faster, but you're also more efficient and you will be able to run for longer into a match. So yeah, keep it really general at a young age. Definitely.
One very practical question from Mr. Bishal. During competition, how long should one warm up and how much time before, especially during competitions?
Sure. Again, it really depends on the level of athlete. Now, at the elite level, the call room might be 30 minutes or even 40 minutes before the competition. So you actually have to warm up, way before that. Now, in state championships, things like that, if it's a very warm day, you don't need to do a huge amount of warm up. Now, if it's your second or third race or competition of the day, you also have to do very little because your body's already warmed up. So the first race of the day would be the race where you do the biggest warm up. Now, for young athletes, it might be 20 to 30 minutes, something like that. If it's a really hot day, maybe 15 to 20 minutes. Once they get to 16 to 18, maybe that goes to 40, 45 minutes warm up, something like that. So it tends to be as you get a little bit older, a little bit more specialist, the warm-ups get a little bit longer. The elite athletes would warm up for probably 1 hour. And the younger athletes, maybe 20 to 30 minutes. But just think about the weather. If it's really hot, they would do less. If it's a second or third competition, they don't need to do a huge warm-up, maybe a few strides, a little bit of dynamic stretching, and they're good to go. That's all they would need to do, because you don't want them to get tired in the warm-up. So yeah, very, very, very good questions.
Okay. We have more than 90 questions in the Q&A, but I will just close with, I think, the most relevant question for the current time. from Firdaus. He asked, sir, during this time, and how do we take virtual classes, and how long it should be?
Sorry, how do we take what? Sorry.
How do we train athletes using the virtual classes, and how do we manage training in the current COVID times?
Yeah, I mean, we have huge challenges at the moment, guys. It's just really, really difficult. And again, you've just got to be as creative as possible and as safe as possible for the athletes and for us all. I know many of you won't be able to go to tracks or fields or anything at the moment. So you maybe have to just try and keep the athletes as fit as possible, and maybe body weight exercises. They can do circuit training, in their homes or in their gardens. They can do things like high knee running, skipping. It's almost impossible to do high intensity training when we have this pandemic on. But what you don't want to do is, if the athletes do nothing, then when this pandemic is over and they all come back to training, it's going to take a huge amount of time just to get them back to the fitness they were before we all went into our lockdowns. So just try and keep them fit. Body weight exercises, flexibility, coordination. They don't need weights. They can do push-ups, sit-ups, squats, lunges, burpees, maybe even pull-ups if they have it. Like I said, skipping. If they have an exercise bicycle in the house, they can do bicycle work. Maybe if they have I don't know, maybe many don't have it. If you have some water, they can do aqua running. So running in the water is a really nice exercise they can do. It's tough times, I'm afraid, for all of us. And you just have to be creative, accept it for what it is, and just try your best to keep the athletes fit. So when they come back to training, although they won't be athletically fit, so they won't be fit to run a 400 meters, but they will be generally fit. So once you start to get the training into their legs, they'll respond a lot quicker than if we just don't do anything with them. So please try with your athletes to get them to do something at home or locally if they can't meet you. It's not safe to do so.
Okay, that was the last question. Thank you so much, James, for hosting such a wonderful and informative session. I'm sure all of us have gained some valuable knowledge from it. Now, I would like to hand it back to you, James, if you have some parting words for our coaches and athletes.
I think, there was at its peak over 800 people on this call, which is absolutely amazing. And, I commend you all, because when I was a young coach starting off, I made it my obsession really to gain knowledge, to read every book I could, travel all over the world to spend time with the best coaches. And I set myself the goal of this: you can learn from anybody. And I want you to take that away with you. You can learn from anybody. And I've learned probably more from my athletes over the years than from anybody else. So guys, coaches, we don't know everything. We really, really don't. In fact, go into something and be vulnerable and say you know hardly anything. Because if you go in vulnerable and you go in with the idea you don't know much, then actually you're opening yourself up to learn a huge amount more. Learn from your athletes and learn from anybody. Good luck, everybody. I look forward to maybe meet some of you soon once the competitions get back up and running. And good luck for all of your athletes. And for all of the athletes that are listening, good luck to you all. Stay strong. This won't be here forever. And it's just here to challenge you. And, be strong. And the harder these things are and the more you get over them, the better you will be as an athlete. So stay strong to all your athletes. Coaches, learn from anybody. Thanks so much for spending time with us over the last hour and a half, and good luck. And I'm sure we'll see you all soon in the next sessions that we're running. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much for those practical words, James, from your practical experience. We are winding up the session. A big thank you to all the participants for attending today's session. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you back with us next Friday, that is 11 June at 4 p.m. At our next webinar covering training drills and skills for young athletes, presented by Rohit Mane, Reliance Foundation Odisha Athletics High Performance Center coach. Before you leave, we request to kindly fill out the feedback form that you will be able to see after the end of the session. On behalf of entire RFYS family, thank you once again. We hope all have a great weekend ahead. Come on, India, let's play.